goodness. Big move Monday. Look out. A way to end the tournament.
So today we're very, very excited to have a special guest. I know we alluded to it last week on last week's show. Happy to have Mike Moyer joining us, Executive Director of NWCA. Mike, thanks for coming on. We really appreciate you taking some time and jumping on here for us.
Sure. No, you're welcome. It's great to be with you.
Awesome. Awesome. So I know Kevin's got some questions. We all have some as well. But I'm going to let Kevin kind of kick things off.
Yeah. So I guess one of the things I wanted to ask about first, let's start off with the thought. You know what? No, let's go with this. Talk a little bit about the OPC and why you think it's important to have one and to keep one, and what impact it has on the sport overall.
Sure. Well, a little bit of background. How the OPC exists is the National Wrestling Coaches Association is a 98-year-old 501c3 nonprofit. It's the oldest wrestling-only organization in the wrestling ecosystem. And one of the things that really makes us unique in relation to all the other organizations in wrestling is that we have an exclusive educationally based wrestling mission. So in other words, we operate exclusively in the middle school, the high school, and the college wrestling space. And at the end of the day, we're really about two things. We're about developing transformational coaches who provide an exceptional wrestling experience in the spirit of preparing young people for success in life. And then we have, about 10 years ago, we developed an operating division known as Wrestlers and Business Network, where we actually take things one step further and we actually connect our wrestlers with incredible career and internship opportunities. So our value proposition, anybody who steps on a wrestling mat, is we're going to help you get to college, to the trades, to a military, or just a career. So within that umbrella, we have three core competencies, if you will, that our organization really focuses on. The cornerstone is coaching development. We believe that nobody plays a more important role in the future of our sport than the head coach at every level. And our organization focuses more actually on the non-technical tactical aspects of coaching than we do on the technical tactical. Things that those unique skills you have to have when you're in and around the educational environment. The second area of competency is what we call student wrestler well-being. And that's where the optimal performance calculator comes into play. So if we rewind the clock going back to 1997, I had the privilege of being the chairman of the NCAA wrestling committee. So within the NCAA structure, there's a sport committee for every sport. And what had happened in 1997 is we tragically lost three college wrestlers within a 35-day period while engaged in extreme weight loss measures. And a lot of people don't realize how close wrestling came to actually getting shut down. I mean, we were on the verge. We were on the brink. And so the NWCA, and so I was, as the chair of the committee, we were working with sports scientists from around the country to figure out how do we prevent something like this from ever happening again. And when I joined the National Wrestling Coaches Association in 1999, what we really need was an administrative friendly way to administrate and safeguard high school and college wrestlers across the country. So we developed the Optimal Performance Calculator, and it's a web-based program. And again, we worked with some of the leading sports scientists from around the country. And essentially today there's over 300,000 high school and college wrestlers that are required to go through this protocol. It's a body composition assessment, a weight assessment, a hydration assessment. It gets fed into this calculator and it calculates an ideal competition weight and a safe weight loss plan for wrestlers across the country. What's incredible about this is we've been able, when you talk about making a lemon into lemonade, well, clearly this unhealthy weight loss aspect of our sport really impeded our ability to grow our sport. And now we're in a unique position to really stand tall and know that we really represent the ultimate physical fitness sport. And today we have the body composition and hydration and weight assessment data, over 300,000 young men and women to prove it. And so it's something that we're changing a culture. We've come a long way. We can always get better. And now with the explosion of girls wrestling, there are some really important nutritional things that young ladies need to know to not just optimize their performance while they're competing, but to develop these healthy habits that live with them the rest of their life. So we developed this, but we never wanted to become a technology company, if you will. So we ended up partnering with, we had several partners along the way. Our first partner was track wrestling. So we integrated the weight management program with the tournament software, and there were all kinds of great benefits that came from that. And then it actually got passed along to NBC University, Universal, and one of their subsidiaries was Sports Engine. And more recently, it's been passed along to Flow Wrestling and Flow Sports. And I have to tell you, I mean, Flow, you talk about a partner that's just all in. Not that our other partners weren't, but Flow is all in. I mean, I don't, the way they cover our sport, the way but they very generously give us a pretty significant piece of revenue off of this weight management tournament software tool, which
Nice.
enables us to really fund to a large extent our mission, whether it's starting new programs, saving threatened college programs. Um, um, we do a lot of leadership training programs for high school wrestlers. I could go on and on and on, but really very little of that would ever be possible if it wasn't for the generosity of our partners at Flow. So a lot of people out there say, how can we appreciate what the NWCA does? How can we help? Just know that when you're using that software, you're helping us in a really big way.
Very nice. I got one more I want to get to here real quick. Let me see. Talk a little bit about, I wanted to ask about the dual championships, but I don't think that's quite as important as this. So talk about what's going on at Capitol Hill and kind of, what's been developing and what the impact is going to be there.
Sure. Well, there's a lot to celebrate about our sport. I talked about our three core competencies. I think I got the two of them. Coaching development's the cornerstone. Student wrestler well-being is the second bucket. The third bucket is advocacy. And one of the things we're really proud about is since 2000, we've helped to start 466 intercollegiate men's and women's wrestling programs. And a lot of people don't realize, most people don't realize this, but 211 of those are women's intercollegiate programs. And the message I want to just send out to a lot of those young boys and girls, men and women wrestling across the country, there's a place for everybody to compete in college. Doesn't matter if you have 1 year of experience or 20 years of experience. There's a lot of opportunities, a lot of scholarship opportunities out there. And so in recent years, we've been adding between 30 and 50 college programs a year. Now, the thing to know about that is most of these new programs are at the Division II, the Division III, NAIA, junior college levels. And what's driving that renaissance is that there's about 2 million fewer college students today than there were 5 years ago. So these colleges and universities across the country are hemorrhaging enrollment. And wrestling is very attractive because it's relatively inexpensive. We have this huge population of high school boys and girls that wrestle and a very limited number of college opportunities. So it's something we should all celebrate. And there's lots of organizations around the country that join us in growing the sport. I think most people know that between 1972 and 1999, we lost over 550 college teams. And the ramifications of that is that's historically where we've trained teachers and coaches. And we develop officials and fans and all the alumni we have in all these different industries. And maybe we can talk about Wrestlers in Business Network a little bit later on as well. But we can get to the top of almost any industry in 1 or 2 phone calls because of this wrestling network that we have. So anyway, while we can celebrate all of that, there is no question that maybe our greatest challenge that we've had is we're faced with if anyone's following what's going on in the NCAA at the Division I level. And long story short is there was a lawsuit some college athletes filed against the NCAA. It's referred to as the NCAA versus House lawsuit. Grant House was a swimmer, and he and some other athletes sued the NCAA because the NCAA rules forever and a day prevented an athlete from going to the local car dealer and being paid to do a commercial or sign autographs or those kinds of things. And so the rules were very restrictive, and they sued, and the NCAA had settled this out of court with the athletes. It was a class action lawsuit. And so as a result, there's a couple ramifications that are going to create significant financial pressures, primarily at the Division I level. The first one is that the way the NCAA business model works, most of the revenue comes from the NCAA basketball championship. A lot of people don't realize the college football, that's not run by the NCAA. So the money that's generated from college football stays primarily with the Power Four conferences. But the basketball tournament is what. So as a result of the basketball tournament, all 360 Division I programs get a disbursement of funds from that billion-dollar enterprise. And it's a complex formula. It's based on the number of sports you have and how many scholarships you have and all kinds of incentives in there. Well, as a result of this $2.8 billion settlement, that's going to mean that these 360 Division I schools will be receiving a reduced distribution from the NCAA of between $300,000 and $1.5 million each year for the next 10 years. So the truth of the matter is the Power Four schools, the Big 10 and the Big 12 and 8, those schools are going to be able to afford the $1.5 million. The mid-majors, that $300,000, $400,000 is going to hurt, but nevertheless, they can still figure out how to overcome that. The bigger challenge is that athletic departments today may now share up to $20.5 million of the revenue with the athletes. Doesn't mean you have to share all $20.5 million. You could share $1,000 or $20.5 million or anything in between there. And as you can imagine, very few of the 360 Division I athletic departments have an extra $20.5 million laying around. And so there's, without any intervention, what's likely to happen is you'll see a mass reallocation of resources away from the Olympic sports and to football, men's and women's basketball. Just for definition purposes, when I talk about Olympic sports, even though basketball is an Olympic sport for the context of this discussion, we're talking about sports, men's and women's sports other than football and basketball.
Yeah.
So as a result, we have a very capable lobbying firm down in Washington, D.C., and there's 4 coaches associations, 4 Olympic sport coaches associations that are kind of part of like a loosely put together executive committee, and we represent 20 other Olympic sport coaches associations. And we've been, so the 4 of us, it's wrestling, swimming, volleyball, and track. We've been really narrowed things down to 2 priorities that we are trying to convince members of Congress to put into any antitrust bill that might be able to make its way through the different layers of approval in Congress. The first one is that there's a requirement that you have to have a minimum of 16 sports as a condition for this antitrust protection. And by the way, the reason the antitrust protection is so important is the lawsuits are lined up as far as the eye can see against the NCAA. Like anytime they try to limit anything, they get taken to court and they get sued over antitrust. So like the longest time, wrestling was allowed 9.9 scholarships. That's an antitrust violation. So today you're allowed a roster of 30, and by default, the maximum number of scholarships you can offer is 30. I don't think anyone's going to give 30, but to just give an example, when we talk about antitrust, the NCAA would try to limit costs because the lower the costs are, the more sports athletic departments can have. But there's been so many lawsuits, that's a thing of the past. So long story short, we want to have a minimum of 16 sports. That's been an NCAA bylaw for probably 30 or 40 years. It's just a lot easier to change a bylaw than it is an antitrust law. So there's something called the SCORE Act, which has emerged out of the House of Representatives down in Capitol Hill. And we've been successful in getting that priority into this draft SCORE Act. The SCORE Act still has a ways to go to where it's going to go to the House for an actual vote. but nevertheless, it's in there. We're now pushing hard for the second priority, which would be to require universities to have a minimum funding floor, like a percentage of the athletic department budget that has to go to the sports other than football and basketball, because our concern is without this, they'll keep 16 sports, but they might fund them as if they're a club sport or an intramural sport. Just defund them so badly where they only exist in name only. So the good news is these 20 sports that we're representing actually represent 78% of the athletes in college. And so we have a good story to tell, and it's been received very well by both sides of the aisle. But until we actually get it in to this SCORE Act, we can't rest. And then once we get this, whether it's the SCORE Act or any other bill that makes its way through the House of Representatives, there'll be a Senate version, and we're going to want to get our two priorities into the Senate version. And then those two bills will get reconciled, and hopefully when all the smoke clears, we have these two priorities in there. And the only other thing I'll just say is that the 16 sport minimum and the minimum funding for does not prevent carnage. It just limits it, because there's a lot of athletic departments across the country that currently have more than 16 sports. So that wouldn't prevent them from going from 28 sports down to 16, but it would certainly limit and reduce the amount of carnage that would take place. The last thing I'll just say about it is, I mean, obviously this is a threat for all sports. Like this is not just a wrestling thing. But what I'll say is our sport has overcome a lot over the years, and our wrestling community is just more battle tested. Like as long as the wrestling program doesn't get dropped, our coaches are prepared to make it work, no matter what it is. They will figure it out. When you think back, we talked about the 3 weight loss related deaths that occurred. We've overcome that, and now we're widely considered as the ultimate physical fitness sport. There was a time when we lost 550 college wrestling programs. We've responded with 466 new ones. Wrestling got bounced out of the Olympics. Not only is it back in there, but Team USA is a world power. Like, the resolve in the wrestling community is like really nothing else. And I don't say that to suggest this is going to be easy. This won't be easy at all. But the wrestling community, whatever it takes, we'll figure out how to make sure we make the best of it.
Yeah. Austin?
Yeah, you're kind of talking my language here, because I cover the EIWA and a little bit of Ivy schools, so the NIL and things like that. High money is not quite talked about as much.
Sure.
So my question to you was, what kind of things are you seeing from these smaller programs to help survive and ultimately not get cut? And what can these fans do? Is that just buy season tickets, donate to the programs, things like that, just to keep these programs afloat?
Sure. Well, one of the programs we do, another program, and this goes back to the weight management program, the track wrestling tournament system, but every year we pay all expenses for up to one year. I think we had almost 150 college coaches to attend. We do this comprehensive CEO Leadership Academy. So we pay for their flights, their lodging, their meals, their tuition. We pay for everything. And for 2 days, we talk about all of these CEO skills. And, to really consolidate things, it boils down to focusing on 4 areas. It focuses on developing strong relationships. We focus on making sure your program is relevant. To your point, what can fans do to help show up for those matches? If an athletic director walks into a home dual meet and sees a couple thousand people there, that athletic director is going to say, this is the last sport I'm going to drop. They'll turn this place upside down. So we got to make sure wrestling is as relevant as could ever be. If you build strong relationships and you make your program relevant, the revenue will follow. You'll have boosters, you'll have friends, you'll sell tickets. All those things result as a byproduct of doing those first 2 well. And then the last one is we just need to be realistic. It's important that coaches are realistic about their circumstances. Realistic doesn't mean be complacent. It doesn't mean be happy where you're at, but it does mean know where you're at. And you want to make sure you're competing at a level commensurate with the resources you have. And the goal is to keep getting more resources so you can make your way up the ladder. But those 4 those four, those four kind of pillars actually apply to high school wrestling as well. There's fiscal pressures at the high school level, nothing like what we're seeing at the Division I level. But there's more and more school districts across the country requiring students to pay in order to play sports. And our high school coaches need to be focused on those same four things. But that's really in our coaching development where we put a lot of energy. We have a modified version of this academy for high school coaches. It's a 1-day, 4-hour workshop. I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico on Friday and Saturday morning. I was in Reno on Saturday. Or Sunday. I was in Anchorage, Alaska a couple of weeks ago. But we're not going to ever let cost be a barrier. And we just want to make sure that our coaches have these critical skills so they're not just relying on institutional funding to do what they're trying to do. But as we've said earlier, the Division I level is by far and away where we're the most threatened, as is every Olympic sport. And this is going to require the whole wrestling community to roll up their sleeves and do their part.
Yeah.
Robbie?
So, Mike, I appreciate you coming on. I know you have a hard out here in a few minutes, so I'm actually going to pass on my question because there's a couple that Ryan had in our floating document here that I wanted him to get to because I think they're good questions. So I'm going to pass it back to Ryan.
Okay, yeah, no problem. So the first one that I had for you, Mike, was we have national duels, we have collegiate duels, right? I wanted to know, one, what are your thoughts on events like that, and how close do you think we can be to having a true national duels champion where not just a couple of select teams are involved, but our top teams like Penn State. Penn State is at the collegiate duels, are not going to be at national duels. How do we make sure that our top teams are involved in our biggest events? And do you feel like we are any closer to having a true national duels champion?
Sure. I mean, we're definitely a lot closer. And bottom line is this goes back to making our sport relevant. When you think of every mainstream spectator sport in America, what do they have in common, right? They have parity, they have unpredictable outcomes, and they have the outcome of every regular season competition determines who gets into the postseason. I don't know about you guys. I'm a Philadelphia Eagle fan. I'm a Philly fan. I watch every game until they're mathematically eliminated. Then I really don't watch again. Until my team's mathematically eliminated, I'm all in. And I've always felt like the NFL does it best. Almost every team is 8-8 on the last week of the season. They all have a chance to get into the playoffs. Their fan bases they're all on board. The media is all on board. You have this excitement. You have this drama. And but you have to get started. And Chad Richardson at Paycom, what an unbelievable thing. I mean, imagine Fortune 500 company investing $1 million in the sport of wrestling. That makes wrestling relevant, right? It's going to be nationally televised on ESPN, the finals. The preliminary rounds will be on Flow Sports. It's the more big moments we have in our sport, the more our sport's going to be relevant. And with respect to just getting all the teams there, we just have to make it so great that the teams want to be there. I mean, could you imagine a football team opting out of the college football playoffs, right? I mean, the amount of money, the amount of prestige. I mean, no one could say no. And it's up to the wrestling community to make this event an event like that. And maybe it starts off as a kickoff event, much like I think in NASCAR is the Daytona 500, I think is a kickoff event. So it's not unusual to have a kickoff event like this, but maybe one day it ends up at the other end of the season and the teams are wrestling their way into it. To your point, it is an invitational now, but maybe it can develop into something where the teams compete. We also provide something for all the other divisions, for the Division I mid-majors and Division II, Division III NAIA. That's January 9th and 10th, University of Northern Iowa. It's slightly over 100 college teams. They compete for a national dual meet championship within their respective divisions. What I love about the dual meet, what fans love and what the media loves is they love unpredictable outcomes. And in a dual meet, one upset changes the whole thing. I was a former coach. I didn't want anything to be unpredictable. I want everything to be predictable. But the fans and the media want the opposite. And I just think sometimes as a wrestling community, we have to decide what we want. Do we want our sport to be really relevant? And if we do, we have to be mindful of what the fans and the media want. And these dual meets, create those moments. I would tell you, the average number of home dual meets at the high school level nationally is 3. Like, how the heck do we make high school wrestling relevant with 3 home dual meets? We got to get better at that. And what I love about the dual meet at the high school level is that usually what determines whether you win or not is not what your best wrestler does. It's what your not so good wrestler. The hero of the night could be the wrestler that lost 15-0 and didn't get pinned. I'll go to my grave saying I think dual meets, we have to make sure. I don't want to do anything to harm those crown jewel individual championships that we have, whether high school state tournaments or national tournaments, but we got to figure out how to get back to dual meets and really strengthen our relevancy in schools and in communities across the country.
Yeah. The only other question I had for you, you talked about the OPC and putting together something that now looks at the safety in sports. And you spoke about us losing some wrestlers, some odd years ago,
Sure.
But a lot of things have changed where we've got a lot more things put in place to have those guardrails. And I know saunas is kind of a sticking point for a lot of people. Do you see that ever becoming more of a prevalent thing where now that it's able to be monitored and it can be part of the OPC as a safety measure, actually being implemented in a safe way?
Yeah, I think what's challenging about that, there's no doubt that the most elite athletes, wrestlers around the country use the saunas extensively, the world level, the Olympic level. What we just have to be careful. It's kind of like a NASCAR driver could say, why do I have to be restricted to driving 55 miles an hour on the highway when I can drive however fast they drive on the weekend, 200 miles an hour, whatever the case might be. It's elite athletes know how to use the sauna and steam rooms. They're trained at a much higher level. The challenge is when the non-elite athlete tries to emulate those practices of the elite athlete, and to a large extent, that's what happened back in 1997. So, you just, for that to happen, it just needs to be some way of making sure we're also safeguarding the critical masses of athletes that maybe they're not that NASCAR driver. They're on the roads, and for good reason, there's a limit to how fast they're allowed to go, myself included.
Yeah. Well, Mike, I really appreciate it. And I know, each one of us really appreciates you coming
Sure.
on. Before you go, is there anything else that you kind of want to put out into the community, any initiatives or anything that's happening with NWCA that we didn't speak about?
There's a lot going on, and I would welcome the opportunity to just do more of these. It's an honor, privilege to serve the wrestling community, and we got an unbelievable team of people here in the NWCA that work tirelessly to make that happen. And we got a lot of great stories to tell, and we just need the help from folks like you to help us tell it. And so appreciate the opportunity and happy to come back whenever it's convenient.
For sure. We'd love to have you back on. We appreciate you coming on tonight and sharing some of the things that you guys have. And like I said, anytime you want to come back, certainly let us know.
Thank you. Keep your hips low and your elbows in tight. Keep your feet moving. Remember the hand fight.
Well, dude, thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.